he is going to help us. And those are just some of the suggestions that I wanted to share.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to miss my college meeting to come to this one. As I was running into friends earlier today, and they asked if I was going to the college meeting, and I told them, no, I'm actually going to be speaking in the College of Health and Human Performance, and every one of them laughed. And I guess they hold you in such high esteem that the notion that I would be speaking to you was amusing to them. You are all teachers here, I suspect, and I want to ask you, do you think that part of your job is to be right all of the time? How many of you think so? No? Well, do you think so? For those of you that don't, tell me, so how much of the time do you think of your job description? If it were in your job description, how much of the time are you supposed to be right? Sometimes.
Once in a while.
I mean, I've thought of this question for years because when I was a graduate student, a graduate assistant, the office mate came in one day and he was very frustrated because of something that had happened in his class, and he slammed his hand on the desk and he said, "The damnable thing about teaching is you always have to be right." And I don't think that's true. I remember the first elders quorum I went to, 1974. And the lesson was on pride. And the teacher defined pride, and I've never forgotten this definition, nor have I heard it anywhere else. Now you probably all going through your own catalog of textbook gospel definitions of pride. Message for me, no doubt. He said, pride is pretense of omniscience. And I think that we, as teachers, sometimes think that is part of our job description. Pretense of omniscience. But of course, our job as a teacher is not to be an example of the knower, but to be an example of the learner. I know sometimes we like to sing and say, I'm trying to be like Jesus. And maybe we think, well, I'm going to act like I know it all, and that would make me like Jesus. But Jesus was a learner too. If you read his interactions with people, you see these moments when he says, I've never seen this before. And I love those moments. And I think of Hebrews 5:8, where it says, though he were a son, yet learned he obedience. By what? By the things which he suffered. Joseph F. Smith talks about two faults that learners can have. One is lazy-mindedness, and the second one, you've probably heard this phrase before, is reading by the lamp of your own conceit. So how do you escape this pretense of omniscience and reading by the lamp of your own conceit, even though we think it's part of our job description somehow? Well, it's this peer review. I'm not talking about boss review. We get plenty of that. I'm not talking about student review. We get plenty of that. And we're obligated to receive those things. But peer review means we have to put our work and our ideas out there in the public eye to be scrutinized and judged even by people that we respect and in some cases revere. We've all been through some sort of peer review. Obviously, if you have a job here, you had to go through a lot of auditioning process to get that job. You remember that process of applications, and I'm sure you've been denied a job or two in your life. I had another colleague when I was a graduate assistant whose office was wallpapered with rejections for jobs that he'd applied to. I couldn't do that, but I do have a file of all those jobs, 1984, 1985, that I applied to, over, well, almost 90 positions to which I applied and was turned down. And I keep that file because I have to look at it occasionally just to remind myself, you're not so hot, before someone else reminds me. As I began to submit things to programs, to be reading a paper here and there, or to publications to get publishing for myself, I began to fantasize sometimes that I would get on the program, I would have that paper published, or at least an offer made, and then I could write a letter to them saying, thank you for your offer. After careful consideration, I regret to inform you that your offer does not meet my present needs. That was my fantasy. And that kind of language, as you know, represents the form letter approach. When reviewers of your work are anonymous, as they usually are, anonymous to you, they can really say mean things. And I remember one that I got that referred to a passage I had written as pure gobbledygook. And trying to be optimistic, as President Hinckley would have me be, I said, well, at least it's pure. But you know that President Monson talks about the paths that Jesus walked. And he's given this talk a number of times, and it's appeared in print a few times. And I've always thought about one of those paths he talks about. You know the story. He talks about the song that's often sung, I walked today where Jesus walked. And so he gives a talk on the paths that Jesus walked. And one of those is the path of disappointment. And you and I need to walk that path as teachers, in submitting ourselves to criticism, to being judged by our peers, to going through this perpetual audition. It is a path of disappointment, but not always. So if you're going to be an example of a learner and not a knower, then you have to submit. You have to submit yourself and your work to peer review. Just end with a couple of thoughts here. 1910, John J. Chapman called teaching, quote, a peculiar talent that implies a need and a craving in the teacher himself. If you're a teacher, in other words, you're hungry for something. And I think that part of that is a craving, a hunger for knowledge and for right thinking and for fellowship. You only get to the satisfaction of that hunger through this perpetual sense of wrongness at some level, I think. That's what keeps us intellectually hungry, but also satisfies us. That feeling that somewhere out there, there's a better source, there's a clearer thought, there's an unhedged piece of prose, or a new idea that's going to upturn the things that we honestly thought were true, like a full laundry basket. And what you and I want and what our students need is not for us to be right all the time, but to know better how we are wrong some of the time. And we do that best, I think, by pushing our thoughts, our work, ourselves into that sometimes harsh light of our colleagues. That's all I have to say. Thank you.